Okay, so we're diving into the world of IFRS S2. These new climate disclosure standards, the ones everyone's talking about.
Right.
We've all seen those corporate reports, and honestly, they're not exactly page turners.
Yeah.
But no worries, we're going to break it all down today. What's in these reports, why it matters, basically why you should even care.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Whether you're an investor, trying to figure out all those sustainability claims, or just someone who uh, cares about how companies are impacting the planet,
Right.
these disclosures are, well, they're a big deal. They're really changing things when it comes to corporate transparency, that kind of thing. And accountability, of course, especially on climate change.
Yeah, no more vague promises. Like, we're going green and all that.
Yeah.
IFRS S2 is about companies putting their climate data where their mouth is.
Exactly. It's a whole new era for standardized information, comparable climate-related information. And investors really are demanding it.
Oh, yeah,
Stakeholders expect it. And frankly, the planet, it needs it.
for sure.
Yeah.
So let's talk about what's actually in these reports. IFRS S2, it focuses on 4 key areas: governance, strategy, risk management, and metrics and targets.
Okay.
We'll get into each of these, but first, I think it's good to just set the stage a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always helpful, to understand the why behind it all.
Right.
We're seeing, I think, a global shift. Investors and stakeholders, they're realizing that climate change, it's not just an environmental issue.
Right.
It's a financial one. A company's ability to deal with all this, to navigate all these risks, the opportunities of a changing climate,
Yeah.
it's critical
Yeah.
to their long-term success.
Totally. And that's where IFRS S2 comes in, right?
Yeah.
Is making sure companies are really thinking about climate change strategically, not just, as a side thing. It needs to be part of their governance structures. And obviously, they need to disclose how they're measuring and managing their impact, all of that.
Right. Having everyone play by the same rules, so to
Yeah.
speak, so investors and stakeholders, they can actually compare companies.
Apples to apples.
Exactly, on a level playing field.
Okay, so let's break down those 4 key areas a little bit, starting with governance. What's the big picture here? What kind of information should we be looking for?
So governance, think of it this way.
Hmm.
It's all about, who's steering this ship
Mhm.
when it comes to climate action within a company. It's about ensuring that climate is embedded in those top-level decisions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not enough to just have a sustainability team kind of off to the side somewhere.
Right.
This is about the board of directors, the CEO, the people making the big decisions. Are they really invested in addressing climate change? What skills do they even have? What's their experience?
Exactly. Investors want to see that climate competence is valued and that the people at the top, they get it. They understand the risks, the opportunities that come with a changing climate.
It's really about leadership and accountability, right? Climate needs to be, woven into the very fabric of how a company is run.
Precisely.
Mm.
And that ties directly into, the next area.
Yeah.
Strategy. A good governance structure, it should be driving a company's climate strategy,
Right.
taking those discussions and turning them into action.
It's where things get interesting from a business point of view, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
IFRS S2 pushes companies to go beyond just, acknowledging that climate change is a thing.
Yeah.
They need to show how they're adapting to a lower carbon future.
Mm.
What are their plans? What are they investing in? How are they positioning themselves for success in a world that's, moving away from fossil fuels?
Right.
These are all critical questions. And a strong climate strategy should address these.
Yeah. And it's not enough to just talk about it. It's about, walking the walk, right? Investors are getting smarter. They can spot greenwashing a mile away. They want to see commitment backed by action.
Right. And those actions need to be a part of the company's overall business strategy. It can't be, a separate thing like a sustainability plan that's off on its own.
Yeah.
Climate has to be factored into everything.
Yeah.
Supply chains, new products, investments.
This makes me think about, like, the car industry. A company can't just say, okay, we have one electric car and that's it.
Exactly.
They have to show how they're transitioning their entire business to sustainable options.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that transition, well, it comes with managing a whole lot of risks.
Yeah.
And that brings us to our next key area.
Risk management. That's got to be a big one here, right?
Yeah, for sure.
We're talking about a changing climate, so more uncertainty, potentially more surprises down the line.
Definitely, yeah.
What are some of the key risks that companies need to be thinking about, and how does IFRS S2 really address those?
Yeah, so this is where things get a little complicated.
Right.
IFRS S2 wants companies to look at both physical and transitional risks. Right, physical risks, those are kind of the obvious ones.
Yeah.
Extreme weather, hurricanes, floods,
Hmm.
droughts, things that can disrupt everything, damage infrastructure,
Yeah.
really impact supply chains.
Yeah, those are definitely the things that make the headlines when they happen.
For sure.
But what about those transitional risks? What do those actually look like?
So transitional risks, it's all about the shift to to a lower carbon economy. They come from policy changes, new regulations, and of course, tech advancements, even like shifts in what consumers want.
Yeah.
Like, imagine a company, they're super into coal-fired power plants,
Hmm.
right? That's their thing.
Okay.
Governments start putting in stricter emission standards, renewable energy gets cheaper. That company's going to face some serious risks if they're not ready for that change.
Adapt or die, right? But on like a global level.
Exactly. And it's not even just about, seeing the risks,
Yeah.
but actually figuring out how bad it could be
Yeah.
and showing what they're doing to fix it.
Right.
Like maybe diversifying what they do, investing in tougher infrastructure, coming up with new products and services that, actually fit in a lower carbon world.
It's about planning ahead, not just reacting when something happens.
Absolutely. That's where, remember we were talking about scenario analysis?
Yeah, the whole crystal ball thing, right?
Exactly. Using data to,
Yeah.
see what the future might hold.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's really important for managing all this, the risks and the opportunities. IFRS S2, it encourages companies to use this scenario analysis to basically stress test their business plans.
Okay, so like paint us a picture here. What would these scenarios even look like?
So let's say a company's thinking about a future where, temperatures increase by 2 degrees, which is like a pretty standard benchmark in all this climate modeling.
Right.
They would then look at, okay, how would that temperature increase affect us,
Okay.
our operations, supply chains, our customers, even like the regulations we have to follow. They might also look at, different policy situations like what if carbon pricing is everywhere?
Yeah.
Or what if we have to ditch fossil fuels super fast?
So thinking about all the possibilities, not just like the best case scenario.
Right, exactly. And by doing that, by thinking through all of it, companies can see where they might be vulnerable and then start making changes now so they're more resilient in the future.
It's like I don't know, a stress test for their business.
Right.
But instead of like a financial shock, it's climate shocks.
Perfect analogy.
Huh.
And just like a financial stress test, you're trying to find the weak points, fix them before it's too late.
Yeah.
Now, scenario analysis, it can get pretty technical. But the main thing to remember is companies should be using realistic scenarios. Scenarios that make sense for their business, for where they operate, all of that.
So a clothing company would have different scenarios than, say, a real estate developer would.
For sure. Their risks are totally different, right?
Yeah.
So how they deal with those risks has to be different too.
Makes sense.
And that leads us to the last piece of all of this. Metrics and targets.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, at the end of the day, you can't manage what you don't measure.
Exactly.
What are some of the big metrics that companies have to disclose under IFRS S2?
This is where it gets real. IFRS S2 is very specific. Greenhouse gas emissions, that's a huge one, obviously.
Right.
And the document goes deep on the whole, the different types of emissions, those scopes.
Okay. Yeah, and that trips a lot of people up.
Oh, yeah.
Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3 emissions. Right?
Yeah, you got it.
Oh, yeah.
So scope 1, those are the direct emissions from the company's own operations.
Okay.
Like burning fuel, their factories, stuff like that.
Right.
Scope 2, that's the indirect emissions from the energy they buy. So the electricity for their offices.
Okay, so those two, I feel like those make sense. But Scope 3, that's where it gets a little fuzzy, right?
A little bit, yeah. Scope 3, those are all the indirect emissions, but from their whole value chain.
Oh, wow.
Everything. From the materials they use to, shipping their products to how those products are, used. And then what happens when people are done with them.
So if we're talking about that clothing company again,
Yeah.
Scope 3 is the emissions from the farms growing the cotton to the factories making the clothes, the ships moving them around, even like the washing machines people use.
Exactly. It's a way bigger picture, and that's often where their biggest impact is. But it's also the hardest to measure well.
I bet.
IFRS S2 gets that it's tough, but it still says companies have to try their best to measure and report those Scope 3 emissions as accurately as they can.
Right, because if you don't have that transparency, you can't really see the company's full climate impact, right?
Exactly.
So beyond emissions, what else are they supposed to track and disclose?
So IFRS S2 wants them to take a broader view of climate performance,
Okay.
not just about cutting emissions. Companies should report on things like how much they're investing in climate stuff, their water use, the waste they produce, even how resilient their supply chains are.
So it's about connecting the dots between climate change and, well, everything the company does.
Yeah.
And that includes their targets, how they're measuring progress over time. For investors, what should they be looking at here?
So just like with the risk stuff, targets have to be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. And really importantly, they should fit with the company's whole climate plan.
So, like, if a company says we're going net zero by 2050, investors should be able to look at their reports and actually see how they're going to get there.
Exactly.
What are they actually doing? What are they investing in? What milestones are they hitting along the way?
Yeah, transparency is key. Investors want to see that they're walking the walk, you know. And investors are getting much better at telling the difference between real climate leadership and, just greenwashing.
Which reminds me of something else from IFRS S2. Companies have to say if they're using carbon credits to hit those net zero targets.
Oh, right, because even though carbon credits can be a part of their strategy, there's been a lot of back and forth on, how effective they actually are. And if companies are just using them to get around actually cutting emissions.
It's like saying, yeah, we're still emitting a ton, but we're like planting trees somewhere else. And I mean, trees are great, obviously.
Right.
But it's not like that just erases the emissions that are still happening.
Exactly. And that's why being transparent about carbon credits is so important.
Mhm.
Investors have to be able to see how those credits are being used, what projects the company is putting money into, and if those projects are actually, making a difference.
They have to be legit, not just some PR stunt.
Exactly. And at the end of the day, that's what IFRS S2 is all about, being more transparent, more accountable when it comes to climate action.
It's like we're finally at a point where we can cut through all the, the fluff and actually see how companies are doing on climate, not just how they're talking about it, right?
Yeah, for sure. And that's a big deal, for investors, for stakeholders, for honestly anyone who cares about, the planet and all that.
Yeah.
It's a big win.
Totally. Now, I know we've gone over a lot, but I'm sure some people listening are thinking, okay, but this is like a CEO thing or for, people managing big investments. Why should I care about these reports?
That's fair. And honestly, it's a question we should all be thinking about.
Yeah.
Because even if you never, ever see these corporate reports, this shift to transparency is going to have a huge ripple effect.
Right. Because we're all stakeholders in a way, right?
Exactly.
I mean, climate change, it affects everyone.
For sure. And these disclosures give us, as citizens, consumers, employees, we've got more power to hold these companies accountable for what they're doing to the planet. Like say you're at the store,
Okay.
deciding between two products. Wouldn't it be good to know which company is actually trying harder to reduce their carbon footprint?
Oh, totally.
Or, invest in better practices, things like that?
Yeah, it gives us more agency, and I think it pushes companies to step up their game when they know people are watching.
Exactly. And as this information gets easier to find, easier to understand, it's going to give everyone the ability to make better decisions about what they buy, the companies they maybe want to work for, even who they vote for.
Yeah. It's like everyone gets a crash course in how companies are dealing with climate change, which is only a good thing, right?
No, for sure. It's about giving everyone the tools, the knowledge to navigate this whole thing.
Totally, totally. Now, before we wrap up, I want to go back to something you mentioned before, this idea of climate resilience.
Okay.
We talked about companies adapting, but what does it actually mean to be resilient? How do these disclosures help us get there?
Oh, that's a great question to end on because it gets to the heart of all this. Resilience, it's not just about, minimizing damage or avoiding risk. It's about thriving, even with all the changes happening.
So not just surviving, but doing well in a world that's going to be shaped by climate change no matter what.
Exactly. It's about saying, okay, how can we create businesses, communities, even whole economies that aren't just sustainable but regenerative?
Wow.
How can we work with nature, not against it?
That's a big question. I don't know if there's one answer. But these reports, by showing us what companies are doing about climate, I think it helps us move past just like avoiding disaster. We can start to see a better future.
Yeah, I'm with you on that.
Right.
By pushing for transparency, by holding companies accountable, now we can get to a future that's more resilient, more equitable.
I love that. Well, this has been a really insightful dive into IFRS S2. Thanks for breaking it all down for us.
Happy to do it. Talk to you soon.
Until next time, everybody.